Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, thou art very great. Thou art clothed with honor and majesty, who coverest thyself with light as with a garment, who stretcheth out the heavens like a curtain, who layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters, who maketh a cloud his chariot, who walketh upon the wings of the wind, who maketh his angels spirits, his ministers a flaming fire, who laid the foundations of the earth, that it shouldn't be removed forever. Thou coverest it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. At the voice of thy thunder they hasted away. They go up by the mountains. They go down by the valleys, unto the place which thou hast founded for them. Thou hast set a bound that they may not pass over, that they turn not again to cover the earth. He sendeth the springs into the valleys, which run among the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild asses quench their thirst. By them shall the fowls of the heaven have their habitation, which sing among the branches. He watereth the hills from his chambers with the fruit of thy works. The psalm is on the majesty of God. How great thou art is the song that best describes the psalm. See Psalm chapter 86 verse 10. As you can see at a glance, the psalm describes the clothing we talk about under Psalm 102 verses 25 to 26. One of the ancient commentators called Psalm 104 an oratory of creation, the cosmogony. Of course, it will not fit into the Darwinian, Einsteinian opium dream. Verse 1. Spiritually speaking, God is clothed with honor and majesty. See Proverbs chapter 31 verse 25. Strength and honor are her clothing. God tells Job to deck himself with majesty, Job chapter 40 verse 10, if he wants to impress everyone how righteous he is. Verse 2, God is light, 1 John chapter 1 verse 5. So he can put on light like a garment. He is the light that is present before sunlight shows up. See Genesis chapter 1 verse 3. The heavens, notice the plural, are a curtain, as we noted under Psalm 102, and therefore the measurements of the universe will not be found in Genesis 1. The real breadth, length, depth and height, Ephesians chapter 3 verse 18, will be found in Exodus chapter 25 verse 31. The tabernacle, the beams of his chambers, verse 3, will be the foundation of the earth if you make his chambers the planet. But the chances that the Lord is speaking about more than Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 9 and 10. The chambers are probably the stories of Amos, chapter 9, verse 6, that are contrasted with the earth. The three heavens of 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 2 are typified by Noah's three-storied ark, Genesis chapter 6, verse 16. So the commentators are probably out of the race already, before we have gone 3 verses. What else did you expect? All of them went into the spasm about how poetic the psalm was before they began to comment. Not a man in the Union thought it was scientific, so-called, for a minute. Do you think the author of the book doesn't know this? The Lord knoweth the thoughts of man, that they are vanity. Psalm 94 verse 11. Compare it with Romans chapter 3 verse 4. Let God be true, but every man a liar. The Lord often uses something visible in nature, see Romans chapter 1 verse 20, to show you the invisible. If you really want a proof text for what we have said about the curtains and the tabernacle, then go up to Alaska and watch the northern lights. They look like the hanging drapes of a curtain. Do you have the quest from which direction they would appear after reading Psalm chapter 75, verse 6 and 7? If you took it at the face value with Psalm chapter 48, verse 2 also. The waters are above the solar system. See Psalm chapter 148, verse 4. Verse 3. The clouds were his chariot in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 4, literally, and the clouds will be his chariot in Revelation chapter 14, verse 14, literally. There are clouds that no telescope has picked up yet. They are part of God's covering along with honor and majesty. See Job chapter 22, verse 13, and chapter 26, verse 9, and 36, verse 29. The light God is clothed with is covered with clouds. Job chapter 36, verse 32. So that men see not the bright light which is in the clouds. Job chapter 37, verse 21. All of the so-called Alexandrian cultists had the clouds of earth in mind when they wrote for the supernatural again unhinged their materialistic carnal minds. The passage in Job 37 matched Psalm 104 so closely that Job says, in conjunction with the bright light in the clouds, that fair weather cometh out of the... It can be really said that out of the north, Job chapter 37, verse 22. Then Job adds the word majesty from Psalm 104, verse 1. So you couldn't miss it. You know what happened. In verse 4, the angels are ministers because they minister. See Mark chapter 1, verse 13, Matthew chapter 4, verse 11, and chapter 28, verse 2, etc. The angels can move in fire, for they are spiritual beings like flaming fire. Verse 4, see Manoah case, Judges chapter 13, verse 20, and the case with the Hebrew children, where the angel of the Lord shows up, Daniel chapter 3, verse 25. An angel can produce fire by touching something, Judges chapter 6, verse 21. Elijah's chariot of fire and horses of fire, 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 11, are in that sense angelic. Note Joel chapter 2, verses 3 to 8. Now we come down to earth. Observe that this descent is indicated in several places in the Bible. But if a man doesn't get Genesis chapter 1, verses 3 to 14 down right in regards to water above the solar system, then he can never get the order right anywhere else. Note in particular Psalm 148, verses 1 to 2 deal with the locality beyond Alpha Dragons. Verses 3 to 6 deal with the solar system and the waters above it. Verses 7, 8, and 8 deal with the first heavens and the things that take place there. And verses 9 to 11 deal with the surface of the earth. The dragons in verse 7, by the way, are connected with deeps that are on the earth. The fountains of the great deep, Genesis chapter 7, verse 11. Genesis chapter 1, verses 3 to 5, is not on this earth and is nowhere near the solar system. It's in the third heaven. Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 to 8, is not on this earth and is nowhere near the earth. It's above the Milky Way. You descend. You begin at the mercy seat, Exodus chapter 25, verses 8 to 10, and work out your way outward. It's a science that the commentators learned in high school that destroyed their belief in the book. The foundations of the earth, verse 5, were laid in Job chapter 38, and they were covered with a flood in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, as with a garment. Verse 6, see 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 5. The waters stood above the mountains. Verse 6, long before Noah's great-grandfather was born. See 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 5. God rebuked them in Genesis chapter 1, verses 2 to 5. At verse 8, you move forward from the first flood to the second one, for the Noahic promise of Genesis chapter 9, verse 11 is found here in verse 9, that they turn not again to cover the earth. Verse 8, the waters evaporate and go up. See Genesis chapter 8, verse 3. They go down into the ocean basins formed by the flood. From Noah's time on, the boundaries are set. Verse 9. The globe will never be covered with water again. The next time it's covered, it will be flames. 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 10 to 12. The results of the drying of the earth in Genesis has been the creation of springs, verse 10, and the water now runs among the hills, verse 10, and gives drink to every beast of the field, verse 11. The second animal need after air is water. Thus the animals, verse 12, and the earth itself are sustained by water. The three branches, verse 12, can't show up unless there is water, for the water sustains trees. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of thy works, verse 13. Absolutely in the millennial sense, temporarily in the church age, just as we have noticed that the outstanding cause of any nation going to pot has been the use of images and idols as aids of worship. We must also notice that the first major judgment that God brings on a country in the Near East is drought. Armies and pestilences may follow, but the lack of water is what produces the famine and pestilence. Read carefully 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 1, and 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 37, and chapter 18, verse 2, 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 25, and chapter 25, verse 3. There are 12 famines recorded in the Bible, with the last one in Acts chapter 11, verse 28. Note the tremendous emphasis the Old Testament puts on drought as a punishment for the sins of a nation. Leviticus chapter 26, verse 4, Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 11, and chapter 11, verse 17, chapter 28, verse 12, 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 36, and 35 and 36, and chapter 17, verse 1 and 7, 2 Chronicles chapter 6, verses 26 and 27, Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 3, and chapter 14, verse 4 and 22, Amos chapter 4, verse 7, and Zechariah chapter 14, verse 17, and until verse 19. We can easily say that idols are a lie, also a lie. So we can conclude, let God be true, but every man a liar.